One of the most exciting conferences in college football last year was the Big 12. This was a conference that had a ton of competition, and it was a conference that was really fun to watch. This year should be the same case. It should be the exact same thing, just maybe some different players, some different teams in the mix, but there still be a fierce competition for the championship. Today, we take a look at the big questions for each team. Before we do that, though, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way in supporting the channel. You make the channel grow, and we've seen a lot of great growth over the last year, and we are hoping to build on that in 2025. But let's dive into the Big 12 and what each team needs to worry about. Arizona is pretty obvious. The first thing for Arizona they have to do is who is going to replace Tedero McMillan? And I think that this is going to be the biggest question that they have to answer, even with some of the players that they lost to the transfer portal. You know, you lose some defensive players that are going to have a big impact, but McMillan was a guy that really kind of made Noah Fifita's life very easy. You're probably not going to do it with one player. You're probably going to do it by committee sort of approach. You have Trey Spivey, Chris Hudson, and Luke Wysong coming in from the transfer portal. And Noah Fifita honestly might benefit more from that. When you look at last year, McMillan was really his only guy. He didn't really feel comfortable throwing to anybody else because you didn't have very consistent options. 2 years ago was a different story. Fifita had better numbers because McMillan and Jacob Cowing were playing really well. So maybe this year will be better if you have someone else getting open or multiple guys open for him. So it helps your quarterback just as much as it helps your wide receiver group. Arizona State has a question kind of similar to that, and it's going to be who is the heart of the offense. Now, while they do not lose a player that had, he had a huge impact, Cam Scatabo did, but he is not the only option that they had offensively. Running the football, though, you probably have some big questions. So you feel like maybe Sam Levitt is going to be the guy. Jordan Tyson, when healthy, was really good. Maybe he is the heart of the offense. The running back group is probably what everybody will pay attention to. Kyson Brown and Raleek Brown could be those two guys that maybe you see step up in a big way. And no one's going to replace Cam Scatterwell 1-1, but you have plenty of talent that could make this team very interesting once again. They could make another run at the Big 12 championship, so we will see. Baylor's question is Sawyer Robertson legit? We saw some really great things from the Baylor quarterback last year. You got Josh Cameron coming back, an honorable mention, all Big 12 player. You need to find some wide receivers to step up for some of the departing players, but Sawyer Robinson was really fun to watch. Over 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns to just 8 interceptions. Also ran for 230 yards last year. So this is a guy who had a really exciting season. And honestly, if you're Baylor, you're hoping that he builds upon that. If he has an even better season, Baylor could be a team to keep an eye out for this year. BYU, can you get over the hump if you're BYU? You went 11-2 last year, 7-2 in conference play. The losses to Kansas and Arizona State obviously hurt. The loss to Arizona State obviously keeps them out of the Big 12 championship game. So you're hoping that maybe this year you're going to get the job done. Maybe you're going to get to that championship game. When you look at the talent they have coming back, Jake Retzloff, LJ Martin is an absolute stud. Chase Roberts is back. Jack Kelly on defense. You have a number of players that are going to make a tremendous impact for this team, and you feel really good if you're BYU in terms of what you can do in terms of winning football games, the talent you have coming back, and then also what that means for you in terms of winning a championship. Cincinnati, who is Brendan Sorsby's top target coming back? Tony Johnson is the one returner that everybody knows, but he only had 449 yards and 6 touchdowns. You bring in Cyrus Allen, Caleb Goody, and Jeff Caldwell from the transfer portal, so maybe one of those guys steps up, but I think losing some of the talent they did, while overall I think there's still a lot that needs to be done for Cincinnati to be a better team, the passing attack is definitely going to have to figure out who's that go-to wide receiver, who is the wide receiver one that really stretches the field. Colorado is going through an interesting change. Deion's sons are gone, Coach Prime's sons, so we look at Deion the coach instead of Deion the coach and Deion the father. Travis Hunter is gone. You lose a ton of talent if you're Colorado, so maybe you need a little bit of time to get back on track. But this is a team that went 9-4 last year. A very exciting team, one of the most polarizing and most talked about teams in college football. And honestly, they were really fun. It was a fun team to talk about. There was plenty of content available for those who wanted to discuss the Buffs last year and even the year before. But this is a team that we'll see how sustainable this model is for Deion Sanders and his coaching staff. Is this something they can do long term? Can they continue winning football games at a rate that we saw last year? We will see. This is a big year for him. It's a big year for Colorado in general, and it'll be interesting. I think they do maybe take a little bit of a step back, but we also maybe didn't think that they'd win 9 games last year, so they could surprise us again. Houston, is this a breakout season for the Houston Cougars? If you're betting on Willie Fritz, you're usually a winner. When you look at his previous stops and what he has done, this is a guy who wins football games. This is a guy who knows how to build a program, and he knows how to put a winning product on the field. When you look at what they had last year, it was not the best season, plain and simple. This was not a good year for Houston, but towards the end of the season, you did see some of that fight. They didn't maybe necessarily win every game, but they showed that they were going to be competitive against teams that were definitely better than them. So we'll see what happens in terms of winning football games. You bring in an infusion of talent on both sides of the football. So the biggest one, obviously, everybody is going to be looking at. Connor Wegman comes in from the transfer portal. You get Dean Connors from Rice. So you have certain players on offense you feel pretty good about. Same thing with the defense. Keontae Scott and Jordan Allen were very surprising additions for Houston. Those are guys who expect to start and be instant contributors. So again, this could be a breakout season. We'll see what that means for Houston. Don't necessarily know, but this could be a much better year than it was last year. Iowa State, is it playoff or bust? With the amount of talent they have coming back, yes, they lose some big pieces on both sides of the ball. They came up short in the Big 12 championship game, so you feel like they have a chip on their shoulder, but maybe they need to sort some things out before they focus too far down the road. But this is a team that is extremely talented. A playoff is definitely in the cards if they play things right and they have the right guys coming back. Rocco Becht is phenomenal. If his development continues, he is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He already is, really, but he will be even higher than he was last year. The defense shows some promise as well. You have good depth on both sides of the ball. The wide receiver position will be kind of under the microscope. Is Isaiah Alston the real deal? It sounds like from what we've heard out of the combine, they expect big things from him. So we'll see what happens with Iowa State. But again, they have their sights set on that playoff. Kansas is up next. Kansas, surprisingly, returns Jalen Daniels for one more year. But what does the offense look like? He's going through his third coordinator in as many seasons, and you look at what this offense did last year under Jeff Grimes, the year before and under Andy Koltnicki, and last year it did take some time to get acclimated to the new system. It definitely took some time for Jalen Daniels to get comfortable. The injuries obviously are always going to be a concern with him, but you have to replace Devin Neal, you have to replace your top weapons on the outside. So there's definitely some things that need to be sorted out for the new co-offensive coordinators and for Jalen Daniels as well. Speaking of quarterbacks, though, Kansas State. Can Avery Johnson take a step? Can he develop as a quarterback, as a passer? This is a guy, if he is able to figure things out with his arm, Kansas State is going to be a nightmare to stop. I think that this team has a ton of potential offensively. Accuracy was concerned for him at times, but when you look at his numbers, he is a dual threat that could be a major problem. Over 2,800 yards passing and 25 touchdowns. Keep in mind, we just said that wasn't his best year. So there is still more for him to do if he can put it all together. 605 yards on the ground as well and 7 touchdowns. You also bring in new targets. Jerron Bradley, the former Boston College and Texas Tech transfer, comes in. Caleb Medford comes in from New Mexico. Those are two guys that could really open up this offense if they're able to find some chemistry with Avery Johnson. And then also Dylan Edwards, an absolute monster in the backfield, is going to replace DJ Giddens, will look a little bit different. He doesn't have that power running. He's more of that explosive threat, that agility and quickness guy who is a home run threat pretty much on every single play. Oklahoma State's kind of on the opposite side of this. Is this Mike Gundy's last season? Whether that, is he going to retire? Are they going to fire him if things don't go well? That's a big question for Oklahoma State. This is a team that struggled last year with a lot of things. They struggled winning football games. They also struggled at times. There were a lot of people calling out the effort of some of those players. You lose a ton of talent on both sides of the football, so there could be some serious concerns going into the year, but they're in that underdog role. Maybe that's where they thrive. Maybe Gundy likes where they're at in terms of that, and maybe they feel like they're in a good position because people are doubting him. You also bring in different offensive coordinator different defensive coordinators. So there's a lot of change everywhere. It's not just the players, it's also going to be the coaching staff. Will that work? We don't know. TCU's biggest question is who's going to get open for Josh Hoover? When you lose two players in Savion Williams and Jack Besh, you're going to be in trouble, per se, because you don't have those guys just readily available. Now, maybe you have a group of players that will do it, kind of similar to what we talked about with Arizona. Maybe you have a group of players that are going to be better than maybe one or two guys. And when you look at Eric McAllister, could be one of those guys that steps up. You bring in certain players like Jordan Dwyer and Joseph Manjak from the transfer portal, but losing Williams and Besh was always going to hurt. It's just a matter of how do you replace that talent, their production, and do you do it with one guy or multiple guys? For TCU, it's probably going to be multiple guys, and Josh Hoover really depends on them. And I think he is one of the more underrated quarterbacks coming into the 2025 season. And I think that he could have a really exciting year if he has the right guys getting open for him. Texas Tech is a team that also, when you talk about Big 12, there's a ton of teams that want to compete for a conference championship. And as we're going through this list, there are a lot of teams that are in that conversation. Texas Tech is one of those teams. And big reason why is they took a ton of transfers coming into this year. So do those transfers make an impact? Are they going to be able to make this team a championship team? We will see. Is an influx of transfers going to be the difference? You look at what they bring in. It's a strong transfer class. Barrett Morton is back. Coy Aiken, Caleb Douglas are back to lead the offense. So you feel like you're in a pretty good position with a combination of returning talent as well as talent you bring in. So this is a team to definitely keep an eye on. The defense, I think, needs to take a step, but you brought in a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball. You bring in the defensive line specifically. Romello Height comes in, Lee Hunter, Skylar Gill Howard. On the back end, you brought in Dante Fowler from Charlotte. Balfour, Dante Fowler from Florida. Cole Wisniewski from NDSU. That's a good couple of players that can make an instant impact on a defense that has had some really exciting players in the secondary. So this is a team to keep an eye on, a team that means business. They are attacking the transfer portal as hard as they can. They're doing a good job of returning the certain players that you maybe want to have come back to make a run. Barron Morton specifically, but this is a team to definitely keep an eye on. Now we get into some teams that maybe had a little bit of a disappointing year last year, and these final three teams are teams that could be contenders if they fix a couple things. For UCF, is Scott Frost 2.0 going to be as good as the first version? The first version was really exciting in 2017. Obviously, you have that national championship run. You have an undefeated season. But now things are different. You're in the Big 12. You're not in the AAC. Scott Frost obviously went to Nebraska. That didn't work. He was kind of off of coaching for a little while. Was with the Rams. He's back. Is this version of Scott Frost going to be as good as it was in that year in 2017? We don't really know, but there are definitely a lot of things that UCF needs to figure out. They're probably going to move on from Gus Malzahn one way or another, whether it was this year, next year. It just felt like they were going in the wrong direction. You bring back a familiar face, a face that was beloved when he was with UCF. Obviously, you knew he was going to leave at the time, but now he is back. But does the second version of Scott Frost running the show look as good as the first version? That's going to be the biggest question for UCF. And if it is, this is a very dangerous team. Another team that is looking to bounce back in a big way, the Utah Utes. Last year was, I don't want to call it a disaster, but it was not the season that Utah really wants to have. It's not a year where you feel like you're in a good position. Cam Rising's injuries obviously were a topic of a conversation week in and week out. Now you kind of know that era is over, and you kind of look towards the future. You bring in a new offensive coordinator in Jason Beck. Is that going to make a difference? I think that everyone's really excited about what Beck brings to the table. You also bring in a potential QB1 in Devin Dampier from New Mexico. He had a good year for the Lobos in 2024. Now he's looking to do it again in the Big 12. Very exciting dual threat that could make things really interesting. Can the defense also get back? I think that's what people want to know is if the offense can take a step, can the defense do what it does best. And this is a group that returns some really exciting players. So this is, I think, a team that is looking to bounce back and probably does. It's just a matter of how high they bounce back. Are they going to contend for the Big 12 championship, or are they just going to get back to a bowl game and be back to maybe 7, 8, even 9 wins? That Utah is just looking to get back on track. And you look at the coaching staff and what they have returning, you feel like you're going to see that in 2025. Final team, West Virginia. And kind of similar to UCF, is Rich Rod 2.0 going to be successful? Rich Rodriguez had one of the more exciting runs at West Virginia that we saw in that program's history, and he obviously departs and bounces around, ends up at Jacksonville State, and has some really good success in the FBS level as well, and gets a job back with the Mountaineers. Can he get the magic back? Can he bring back what we saw when he was with the Mountaineers earlier this century? And you bring some familiar faces back. Pat White is on the staff. Noel Devine is on the staff. So maybe you're trying to get some of that energy, some of that aura back into the locker room, back onto campus, and get things going. The question, in addition to that, is who's QB1? Nico Marchiol is not someone that Rich Rodriguez recruited, but he is still on the roster. He is expected to be QB1. He has plenty of competition, though. The biggest one is Jalen Henderson from Texas A&M. Is he going to be the guy? He feels like a good fit in Rich Rodriguez's system. I think that there's a lot of good fits from what the Neil Brown staff brought into Rich Rod's group and what he wants to do offensively, and Marchiol and Henderson both feel like they're in good positions to do that. Again, the Big 12 is stacked in terms of teams that can compete, and if you're looking for an entertainment value, there aren't many better conferences in terms of number of teams that can potentially win than the Big 12. It may not be the most talented in college football. It's not going to be the conference that sends the most players to the NFL draft, but this is a conference week in and week out that you're going to want to pay attention to. And some of these questions, if teams can answer those, have major implications for what these teams will do in 2025.